L'chaim.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. Here we are.
I would like to toast and thank Sam and Faye for coming to Telluride on this Friday, Shabbat, July 19th, 2002. Sam has agreed to relive and recount the stories back in Poland, and he's going to tell us what it was like before the war, during the Holocaust, and explain to us the roles of the members of the family. And we look forward to listening and sharing this with all of our family for many, many years to come. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Wait, one more. So, we thought that we would start by focusing on your life as a child and your memories of what it was like growing up before the war. With your parents, with your sister, with the extended family, the setting. Actually, what might be a nice way to start would be if you could describe to us what you remember your house looking like, what the terrain was like, what Poland was like in that time. So
Okay. All right. When we talk about before the war, we talk about before September 1, 1939, of course. My earliest remembrances go back to end of 1936, really, at which point I was 4 years old, plus, like going into the 5th year.
What do you remember?
At that point, the most vivid remembrance that I have at that particular age, believe it or not, was being in Cheder.
In the temple.
No, it's not. It wasn't a temple. We'll go into just how things were set up, the way I remember it, and realizing one thing. You have to realize one thing, that I was born in a village, Stav-Novakovsky, right, which you have visited, right?
Describe it.
Well, that village had approximately, to the best of my memory, probably 200 families, of which there was only one family that was Jewish, and that were the Peltzes. There was a little river running across. Perhaps when you were there, you saw it dried up, didn't you? It was almost dried up, right? But nonetheless, it was a little stream there. Okay, there were two sides to that stream, the left side and the right side. I and my mom, my sister and my dad, we lived on the right side, and Grandpa Abraham and Grandma Chaya and Brancha, or as we called her then, Mima Brancha.
She's the oldest sister?
She's the oldest sister of
Your mom's
on my mom's side, yeah. And her husband, Shir, and she had a daughter, Paula, Pearl, what we'd call today Pearl, but her name was Paula, and her son, Yossele, he's in Toronto, cousin Yossele, right? And, of course, Uncle Nathan was still at home, a bachelor at home. Everybody else, Uncle Leo then yet was at home, because he hadn't left yet until before the war broke out to Argentina. So basically, we were the only Jews in those two houses. Excuse me, 3 houses. There was Mime Mandvoire, which is the next oldest sister to Mime Branche. Her name was Mandvoire. She had 3 daughters. One was also Paula, Hannah, and Rivka. And she lived, when you were in Stav-Novakovsky, you probably didn't even see that, because she lived way back at the extreme end of that village. being that you probably, I could describe it, but it really was all the way down by the lake where their big river, Viepsh, was running, you know, and she lived all the way down there. So basically we were the only Jewish people living in that village of, I would say, 200 farmers. And it's centered around a rich Polish noble, what they call the hrabia in Polish, right? And he was a landowner. He was called Hrabia Zamoyski. Now, basically, Uncle Nathan and Uncle Leo, and to some extent Grandma Chaya, kind of made a living from that Hrabia. Why? Because the two uncles ran what you call in Jewish a mleczarnia, and what would you call here a dairy processing plant, okay? You'll hear some Jewish expressions, you know.
Dairy
The way
processing, you mean they made...
processed milk, and took milk, processed into various milk products. But we called it a mleczarnia in Jewish, and that's the way I knew it when I was a little boy, a mleczarnia, you know. And Grandma had 2 cows together with the nobles' cows that were pastured over there, because pasture was a big item there, where to pasture your cow, you know. So I remember I used to sometimes go with her and milk the cows, the 2 cows, you know, and she would submit her milk together with the milk from the...
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So, Grandma Chaya, she did that, but Grandpa Abraham didn't?
Grandpa Abraham was ill. Grandpa Abraham, ever since I can remember, ever since my memory, always studied the Torah, and he always praying. And I will go into this particular thing as we go along into how things developed between prior to the war and then after the war broke out. And I don't know how many years prior to that was Grandpa Abraham sick and sickly, because I don't remember. I was born in 1933. But ever since I can remember, I remember pretty good as a 4-year-old. I remember pretty good as a 5-year-old. And from then on, I really remember it very distinctly, every little thing, you know. So going back as a 4-year-old, really, my world was limited in the sense that we were living on the other side of that village, of that stuff. And if you can imagine it as you were there, there was a big meadow there. Were you at the spot where our grandparents' house was supposed to have been? Did they show you where the house was? No, okay.
We were just at Yannick's house.
Is that, yeah, all right, Yannick's house is always at the extreme end of Stav Novakovsky. Now if you imagine it, go back maybe 3/4 of a kilometer, all the way back, and then you will see where you would see, of course, where our grandparents' house was. It was a little house that had one big room with a kitchen on the right side, and was lots of beds, and the 2 uncles slept there, and Grandma and Grandpa slept there. And when there were more kids, they slept in that room just as well, because the way it was set up, if you can imagine, as the sleeping area was a little higher than the dining room area, you know? It's like 2 steps down, so it would like be separated, plus there were separations of covers of some sort, you know, so there was some sort of privacy, I guess, you know. And then there was a hallway. On the left side of that hallway was the entrance to a kitchen, a small kitchen where Mimi Branche, or Aunt Branche, lived with her 2 kids and her husband. Her husband played the a saxophone. That's all he did. He wasn't making a living, and Aunt Blanche was sewing. She made a living sewing. And her daughter, who at that time that I can remember must have been about 14 years old, she helped her with this. As a matter of fact, Yosele was already helping her to sew as well. And then they had another room past the sewing place where they slept, and that was that. And in the back, you entered the back. All this, you go from one room, there's a hallway. From the hallway, you went right into the other. Was a little barn where they kept Mimi Branche kept her cow, because everybody had a cow, and that's how. I guess milk was the necessity in those days, and a little butter and so forth, and she kept that cow. So everything was there, the cow, everything, right in that little house, okay? Now that house did belong to Grandma and Grandpa. The land did not belong to them, just the house. They built a house there. It was a very small house. We rented the house from the farmer. His name was Shvistosky. And he was quite a rich farmer. He had lots of land. I remember kind of hanging around the cows there and this, because right off the bat, you have to understand one thing. In Poland, it was, for the Jewish people, it was a horror to live. Because no matter where you went, it was always Żyd. Żyd. You know what Żyd means? Żyd is Jew. So the first thing they called you is a Jew, Żyd. Żyd, Jew, non-believer. Żyd, niedowiarek. But that's just going a few months, a year after that. But going back to my first memory, really, the first thing I remember, I was going to Cheder, which is like a yeshiva, but not quite. Okay, the reason that, and it wasn't in Stav-Novokoski. It was about 8 kilometers from Stav-Novokoski, near the town of Izhbitsa, which you heard, right? Which we'll come back to your dad there, which was 90% Jewish. That particular Izhbitsa was 90% Jewish, and it had a great history. I mean, I didn't know it then, but I know it now, right? That it had a great Jewish history, okay? At the age of 4, I didn't study the history of the Polish Jews. But I went to Tarnagira, village of Tarnagira, which is before Zamość, before Izhbitsa. Why did I go there? Because my grandparents from my father's side lived in that village. So what they did is, they would, and my grandmother's brother ran the cheder. It's what you call, you heard of a cheder? Okay. That's what that was, a cheder. So he was called Uncle Gil, okay? And what happened is, they picked me up from Stav-Novokoski with a horse and wagon, took me to my grandmother and grandfather from my father's side, right? And I was going to Cheder, right? It was right across the street from them. Now, Tarnagora happened to be 60% Jewish. There were lots of Jews lived there, okay? And I was, in the morning, I would get up, go to Cheder, and in Cheder there were 12 kids sitting by the table. And this Uncle Gil would have a kind of big stick. I was the youngest one. The little kid, I was the littlest kid, and there was kids as big maybe as 10, 12 years, okay? The other kids used to live by him, and he used to give them food. I used to live across the street by my grandparents. I would go there early in the spring, stay until summer came along, for like 3 months, 4 months, and to learn Aleph Beis. Okay. Of course, I remember vividly what we used to. I only started. Everybody had their own thing to do. I, the youngest, being the youngest, Aleph Beis, and kind of put things together, and you'd be surprised how fast you pick up the words that you're supposed to study. And you wear a kippah, you know, a yarmulke. The other kids wore, you know, locken, you know, which is payas. I did not, you know. I got a regular haircut, but I was accepted that way. And then we used to learn every day the davening. Sometimes Uncle Giel would kind of fall asleep, you know, and so the boys used to light up a match on his foot. Of course, when he woke up, he would spank everybody, but not me. I was just having fun without getting punished for it, of course. I really wasn't instigating it too much. I mean, as the littlest amongst all of them, I wasn't in it, you know. And so the first age that I can remember in terms of these kind of things, that was my particular life for about half a year between the ages of 4 and 5, living with my grandparent Zisel, Baba Zisel, and Zaide Volvish for 3-4 months and studying the Cheder. Then in the summer going back to Stav Novakovsky. I guess, what did I do? Shabbat, I used to go to shul with my grandfather to Izbice. It was a walk of maybe 2 kilometers.
Abraham?
No.
This is here.
This is Zaide Volvish. Yeah, when I was at that age, the Cheder was in Tarnagura. Yeah. Okay, so I used to walk with Zaide Volvish to the synagogue, and that synagogue was a fantastic synagogue. It probably had maybe 1,000 people could go in. Men downstairs, women upstairs, and fortunes of kids we used to play. And outside the shul was a beautiful shul, and it had steel fence, not a tall fence as a preventive fence, but a decorative fence, I remember. Very nice decorations, you know. And us kids used to run around outside, very little praying, you know. And of course, everybody else was praying inside very fervently because Izbice was known as a very religious town. So I'd say the great majority of the people were religious because everybody showed up in that synagogue. I mean, it was only synagogue. There was no other synagogue there. And so that's the way, the best I can describe the way life was. Did I encounter problems in terms of attitudes of the Christian people around me? At that point, no. The reason being that really there was no opportunity for anybody to do me any harm or anything like that. But because I used to get up, and believe it or not, my grandma used to try to feed me like anything, and I didn't want to eat. I remember that distinctly, and she would offer me eggs and anything under the sun, and I just wouldn't eat. And she used to beg me to eat. Sometimes did her a favor, I ate. And then right away I went to Cheder. She picked me up when it was getting dark, and that was that. So, and
Was Rose with you?
no, I was by myself.
So where was she?
She was in Stav Novakovsky with Mom and Dad. She was going, at that time, she was going to the 2nd grade to Polish public school that they had at Stav Novakovsky. That's a different story, you know. What she had to go through there, that's a thing for itself. What we're talking about at the moment is something else. So I don't want to jump the gun with all these things. If we're really going to do a chronology of just how things were, the way I remember it, we have to go by different times and so forth, you know. And we can cover that. But basically, that's the way time went by the first year that I can remember. And it was nothing that would make me feel like I was afraid or things. Yes, I was afraid because before I left, some vandals threw some things into the house where we lived in Stav-Novokoski, broke the window, and they shouted Židi do Palestiny. You know, that kind of rang the wrong way with me. Židi do Palestiny means Jews go to Palestine, you know. But beyond that, I didn't see any beatings or anything like that.
Did you mind leaving your parents and your sister to live with your grandparents?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, I was happy to go. For the reason I was happy to go is because I really didn't have anything to do in Stav-Novokoski. I was kind of by myself. My sister would go to school. My mother was Mimi Mandvoire. We were selling merchandise out of the house. So what they did is they used to go into the villages and peddle merchandise, you know, material for making clothes. So what happened, I stayed by myself, okay?
And Dad?
Dad used to go try to buy a calf here, a calf there, to try to earn a few zlotys. You know, Polish money in those days was called a zloty. And so I really was by myself. So what did I do? I had to find ways to just do something with myself. Now you ask yourself, what about the other kids? Well, other kids don't play with Jews. You know, you're just by yourself. And the couple of kids that were of our landlord, for example, they were not abusive to me, but they didn't want to play with me. So what did I do? I played by myself. Did I have toys? No. I improvised toys. I had a lot of soda bottles, small soda bottles, large soda bottles. So what did I do? I made believe that some of them were calves and some of them were cows, and I took them to pasture. I used to tie strings to the heads of the empty bottles, and I used to pull them. All sorts of stuff like that, you know, that I remember doing. And so the day passed by, and my mom would come, and she would and my sister would come from school, and she'd take care of me. So once my sister came, we were together already. A lot of times we would go from our house, cross the river, that little river that ran. At certain points it was only maybe knee deep, so you could cross it instead of going all the way around. I don't know if you traveled in the village from corner to corner. I don't know if you did. If you did, you would have seen that from that Yannick, if you go all the way down, make a right, make another right, and make another right, you would have come where we lived. Or cut across the river, and it was like maybe a quarter of a mile altogether to go to Grandma's Chaya's house, okay? So when Rose used to come from school, we sometimes went to Grandma's house, or we just hung around home till Mom came, and she would make supper, and then Dad would usually come also by the evening, perhaps with a cow, perhaps without anything, you know. So basically, that's the way things were at the age of about 4, going into 5. And we're talking about...
What was Chaya like?
Chaya. Oh, she wasn't tall. She was very skinny. She kind of dark-haired, maybe brunette dark, kind of, you know. But she was very skinny. She kept her hair, what you call, like this.
Bun.
Yeah. Not a bun, but well together, like in the back, you know. She wore a kerchief. She always was busy. She baked terrific. Thursday and Friday she used to bake for Shabbat. And she baked by favorite, a fluten, you know. A fluten first she made a dough, you know, thin spread. Then she cooked rice, well done. Then she took cheese, mixed it with the rice, put some vanilla, what you call extract, mixed all that real good by hand, put that in, real thick like that. And then put another layer of dough. And they put a little egg. She beat up an egg, put it on top, and put it in the oven. You've never eaten such good, this thing I remember. And you know what? I mean, really, we're getting away from ourselves, but she baked that until 1 year before they liquidated us, you know. A year before that, there was no more the possibility to bake, but she really baked it all the time for us. For us, meaning me and my sister and everybody else, of course, but she looked out, I guess perhaps she looked out for me more than anybody else. I don't know why. Well, perhaps I was the only kid around there that was small. And my sister was, because the other kids didn't come around. They lived in Ishbitze. And this is, you know, in those days, living in the villages was a bit of a stigma versus living in a small town, you know. I don't know if you're aware of that, but like, you know, everybody wanted to get away from the villages, see? Well, we were there, and I was there, and I was the youngest, and Grandma and Grandpa just had me around, and I was the boy, so I was kind of the thing, you know, okay? Not that my sister was not appreciated as well, but Shloimeh, okay? That's my Jewish name, is Shloimeh, you know. So, Shloimeh, I would get anything I wanted, and more, you know. I didn't even have to ask for it, because I was the only thing around, you know. And both by my grandma Zisel, I was also the only grandson, really the only grandson by her, because my father on that side, he was only married. There was another married brother, but he had gone to Paris with his kids. So my other three uncles, you probably know Uncle Joe, right, from Paris. None of them were married, and the other two, Giel and Hersch, you know, none of them were married, so I was it, you know. Well, when you're the only grandchild, I mean, you're spoiled, so that was me. So at any rate, that was just about the way things were from my first remembrances in terms of, we're talking year 1937. Of course, the next couple of years were a little bit more strenuous and a little different. But as far as the first thing I remember, that's it.
Now, this might be pushing forward a bit, but did like the extended family come over from Ishbitze and Morrison, my father?
Come over from where? To where?
To Ishbitze. From Ishbitze did people get together? The family.
Okay. Did we get? Are you talking about when I was 4?
No, whenever you remember.
All right, sure, but not. They got together during the war. Before the war, practically not.
Really?
Practically not. If anybody, we went to them, to Ishbitze. Because now, when you're talking about that, you're talking about different things. Remember, there is a great distinction in those days between living in the village and living in the town, as little as a town was. People trying to get out of the villages, because really living in the village was a dark thing to do in terms of education, in terms of what you could do. I mean, there were so little things that a Jewish person could do in the village. unless the village was inhabited by a large number of Jewish people, which Staff Novokoski was not. As I told you before, Staff Novokoski, the only Jewish people in Staff Novokoski were the Pelts. This is it. And how many were we? Okay, Mimi Mandvoire, 3 daughters, her husband and her, that's 5, right? Mimi Branche, 2 kids, Yosele and Paula, her and Uncle Shir, that's 4, is 9, right? Bob and Zadie, that's 11. Uncle Nathan, Uncle Leo's 13. Us 4, I, my sister, my mother and father. So you got 17 people. I mean, we were 17 people of one family amongst 200 Christian family farmers. And I'd say probably there were 1,000 people lived in the village, versus the 17 Jewish people. So what could we do, really? We were thankful that nobody beat us up. Because that was the case in those days, where the Jews would get the licking. And if you're just 17 people, you have to be well-liked, and what they called us is our Jews. If a strange Jew would come, that's a different story. Of course, I recall, we were visited by relatives. Uncle Shloime used to come, I remember, tall, gray-haired, bearded man. He used to come a lot. I never seen him being accosted by anybody. He used to stay by Grandma and Grandpa. Perhaps some other, I don't remember the names of a few other members of distant family from other villages that would come, like Plinke. We had some relatives in a village called Plinke, which was probably 6-7 kilometers from there. Sometimes people would come to us from there, not to us, my family, meaning I, my sister, my mother and father, but to Baba Zisel and Grandpa Abraham. They would come to them, and we would come to them. So that's where we would get together. But you're not talking about when I was 4. This is when I was 5 and 6 and onward.
You saw your uncles and aunts that way?
Oh, my uncles and aunts, like Mandvoire and Branch, I saw them every day.
No, the other ones, the ones that were...
Oh, then when I used to see him when I went in Cheder. Because I used to... Right, I was only there. So, first of all, Shabbat, they used to come to shul. Uncle Moshe used to be.
Oh, yeah.
Uncle Moshe used to be in shul, and his son's name was Tuli. He had a little son. Uncle Moshe had a little son, Tuli. And he had a daughter, Reisel. Her name was Reisel. You know that your dad was married also before the war, right? And
Did he also go to the temple?
Right. And his daughter, she was a small girl. She was younger than me. And the little boy was just born. He had a son too. Your father, by his first marriage, had a little boy, a very little boy, and a girl.
Do you know the boy's name?
No, I don't remember the boy's name.
So then he was like a couple months old?
Yeah. When I was 4, he was a couple months old. Of course, I remember him. We used to play later on, but now we would have to go further into the life. But we're talking about now when I was 4, right? Okay.
Sure.
So when I was 4, all I can tell you is about, otherwise I'd be jumping the gun, is that when I used to go in Cheder there, they used to come to shul as well, so I used to meet them every Shabbat. Uncle Moshe's first wife, her name was Esther.
Uncle Morris.
Morris. And her father was a rabbi, a big rabbi. Uncle Morris happened to have been very learned in davening and stuff like that, And in those days, when you knew that, you were considered learned, Your father wasn't that learned in this. Uncle Leo wasn't that learned in this. No, I remember this as a little kid because I know that when I used to be in shul, Uncle Moshe used to get kuvit. You know what kuvit is? Okay. You know, he used to be up by the bima there, you know. But your father was hanging around in the back, you know. So, and his wife, I never seen coming to shul. So, I mean, I remember her, but I didn't see her in those days when I was 4. I don't remember her coming to shul. So that's how I happened to come with when I was going to Cheder. Now, when I was not going to Cheder, of course, then I was in Staff Novokoski, and I didn't have anybody. We went to, we had a shul there too, but we're talking about a year later now, not at that point, you know. So basically that's about all that I can tell you from that particular year or age, you know.
You can move on to...
All right. I thought you wanted to ask something. All right, now let's...
We get a picture.
Okay, so now we're really moving towards 1939, and we're talking about 1938, 39. Before the war?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so as I think as I was getting older, it's either because things were maybe in Poland, things were being more anti-Semitic or whatever. At my age, of course, I don't know what was going on in terms of politics, right? But I do remember when Pilsudski, who was the president of Poland, died. Another man by the name of Schmigler-Ritz took over. Now, I do remember, and the reason I remember is because when I was even that little, when we used to get together by Grandma Chaya and by Grandpa, they used to talk politics. And they used to say that President Pilsudski was good for the Jewish people in Poland, that he used to give them rights and respect them. But Schmigler-Ritz, who came in 1938, was bad. He was an anti-Semite, that he didn't like Jews, and he let people who were nobles take reign of Poland, really, and they were very discriminative. Now, how did I feel that as a little boy? Suddenly, now here I was about 5, right, and it was summer of 1938. After I come back from Cheder, you know, from my usual Cheder learning, I used to go myself because, as I told you before, my mother used to do this business with my aunt, and the wind-up was I was by myself for a substantial part of the day, and I had to find myself something to do. So sometimes I would just play in the house. The games I just told you, nothing ever changed, unless somebody brought me some real toys and I would have something else to play with, which did happen sometimes. You know who brought me some? Uncle Yossel. Sometimes would come to visit us and he would bring me real toys from wherever he got it. And it was a real treat for me at that age.
Uncle Yossel?
From Paris. You remember him from Paris. When he would come, he'd always bring me chocolate. He'd bring me a toy. I mean, he'd bring me something new, okay? And so I had some of this stuff. Otherwise, I'd do the improvisation, but improvise and play and so, by myself, really. But you know, sometimes decided to go by myself to Grandma and Grandpa, which I had to walk either across the river, and I didn't. My mother always used to say, don't walk across the river by yourself. Walk all the way around. Okay. So when I started walking, a lot of kids would come over to me. A lot meaning maybe a half a dozen kids, various ages, and they would say, stop. And I would have to stop. And they would say, we want to tell you something. Shlomo, we want to tell you. They all knew my name, of course. Yeah, well, I'm listening. What? First of all, you're a Žid. You're a Jew. I didn't say nothing. Okay. Then they said, well, we have to tell you this. First I'll tell you this in Polish. It says, Żydzie, Żydzie, niedowiarek, twoja dusza na kantarek, kantarek się zdjął, twoje dusze diabeł wziął. I had to listen to this. And I spoke Polish, of course, which means, Jew, Jew, you non-believer. Your soul is on a scale, and the scale is busted, and your soul the devil took. Now, they told me this, and I just looked at them, and I said, all right, I don't know why they're telling me this, and I didn't tell them that, but I was thinking to myself, and then they would take some dirt and throw some dirt at me, sick a dog on me, and then I would run away. And as I would run by the dairy where Uncle Leo and Uncle Nathan were running. So my first stop was there. And they would see the dirt on me, say, what happened, Shloime? I say, well, the Shkutzim means the Gentile kids did all this to me, this and that. All right, don't worry about it, everything is okay. They didn't beat you, did they? No, they didn't beat me, and they did not beat me. Just threw things at me and made me feel bad, you know. And, but Uncle Nathan and Uncle Leo used to clean me up and used to take me, give me some money, and across from the place where the Mlichani was, where the dairy was, there was a little store that sold candies and all sorts of sundry things which were of interest to kids, and go ahead and buy yourself something over there. They always, every time I would come there, they'd give me the money, and I would go in there and buy myself that. Kind of that made up for the thing I had to go, you know, and listen to that stuff from these kids. And I hung around there, and you know, they had beautiful, beautiful chicken. They had maybe 10, 12 chicken. Brown, big chickens. God, big chickens. You know, they used to lay such big eggs. I used to hang around in the dairy for a couple of hours, you know. And over there, everybody was nice to me. Shlomo Toya, Shlomo this, and Shlomo that, and Shlomo this, and you want some sour cream, you want some butter, you want some this. I mean, if I could eat, forget about it, whatever, you know. And I used to put my hand in and take the eggs out, you know, and they told me, you take the egg to grandma, you know, because next I was going to grandma. So it kind of killed my morning, you know, my whole day. I would go there and then pick the eggs up and take these eggs in a little bag or kerchief that they would give me, and I would walk to grandma. And of course, once I got to grandma, that was it. That was my castle. I mean, you know, I could have whatever I wanted, and grandma would make me whatever I wanted to eat. Why beyond that I was capable of eating, you know. And then she would take me to milk the cow, go up to there, and go up to here. I used to spend most of my time with her until it was time for me to go back to the house, or Rose came and met me by grandma. And Rose was going to school then. She was going to 3rd grade, maybe already. I used to listen to her study, and I used to learn everything she was learning. There was a funny way of the way they were teaching then. They used to memorize things, memorize poems, and Rose had to learn, and I used to tell her, well, I know that one already because you started yesterday, and I used to tell it to her. So she said, you know what, I'll tell the teacher, and maybe I can bring you so you can tell the poem in front of the class. I said, okay. And she took me to school, and I told poems a lot of times. I told poems, and in Poland, you used to go to school when you were 7. So it was no time for me to go to school anyway. But Rose used to take me, and I used to tell these poems to the class, and everybody was surprised because I was like 5 years old, and I would remember these. And now, of course, at school, it was not so easy for a Jewish kid to be at school, and Rose was the only Jewish person going to school there. And she had to go through a lot of name calling and throw of dirt at her and beaten up a little bit. I wasn't beaten up there, but Rose was. She used to come home crying sometimes. She was beaten up by this and beaten up by that. And Mother and Dad couldn't do very much about it because that was it. It's either that or you would have to move out of the village and go someplace else. So basically, that particular part of my life before the war, and I'm referring now to 1938, was the usual basic, just kind of living by yourself. You just did not congregate with the other kids who are Christian. The only time that it changed was in '39. Next to Baba Haya's house lived a family, and their name was Bazarechik. They had maybe 7 kids. They were poor like the devil. Of course, by the way, we were very poor. As a family, I mean, we were poor. I just don't remember any riches. I mean, we had food. We had Shabbos challah. Oh, when I tell you, I have to tell you how it was baking for Passover. Oh, that was a fun time, baking for Passover. And also for what you call, for Hanukkah. That was a fun time too. And Purim. That was a fun time also. But at any rate, these kids kind of got used to us, and we used to play with them. And there were like 4 or 5 of them that were kind of our age, mine and my sister's age. And when I got there, and when Rose came from school, then we had a little mix-up and we were played a little bit. But otherwise, it was all by myself. And you just had to fend for yourself. But let's go back now. That reminds me, like, used to, for Passover. Now that was a really fun time, because I used to help Zadie Abraham to bake matzahs. Now, the way we baked matzahs by Zadie Abraham. You know, Grandma Chaya and Zadie Abraham. In that same kitchen that Aunt Branche lived in. But she had a big oven, and it would be heated up, and we would make the matzahs for us, for Mimi Branche, for Baba and Zadie, and for Mimi Mandvoire. And everybody would take these matzahs in a big, big sheet, a white, clean sheet. And we baked it before Passover. And you'd hang it on the ceiling in the house so they would not get treif, you know. They had to be kosher for Passover. Hang them up by the ceiling, could not touch it until Passover day, you know. Used to make kosher the... by the way, we were strictly kosher, you know. Despite all the troubles, despite all the difficulties. The shoichet, you know what a shoichet is? He is not a butcher, but he's a ritual slaughterer. A shoichet is a ritual slaughterer. He would come once a week, and he would slaughter according to the Jewish law, the chicken or the geese, whatever you had, or if there was a calf, a cow. Then we never slaughtered a cow, but we did slaughter a calf, and we slaughtered a young cow, like a heifer, you know. That I do remember being slaughtered, and everybody would get a piece, so they would have meat for like weeks and weeks, even without refrigeration. But it was stored in the cellar, and cellars were very cold and kept up the meat. And there was kosher. and we always kept kosher. There was always Shabbos dinner, and when we were in Stav Novokoski, we went to pray every Shabbat because there was a small synagogue in a village called the Kolonia, which was about 3 kilometers up. You had to walk. Now, that was an experience walking, because sometimes there was some mean boys that would throw dirt at us and give us a hard time on the walk back and keep calling you Zhidi, you know, Jews, you know? Just harass you. Not physically beat you, but harass. But we would walk, almost the whole family would be walking there, including grandma and grandpa and everybody else. It was just practically all the Jews of the village, which were us, walking to shul on the Kolonia every Saturday, unless it was very cold or it was snowing. Then they would daven by grandma and grandpa. But it couldn't, if they daven there, of course, there wasn't a minyan, there wasn't enough people for a minyan, but nonetheless, they would daven it. So, basically, things were kind of uneventful, except that you felt like you were afraid that somebody would come around and beat you up and just harass you and bother you, and so on. But let me say this, that I do remember some pleasant things too in the relationship with the non-Jews. And I used to, first of all, where we lived, I used to go to the man that owned this whole farm, and he would be very nice to me. I would help him. I would hold the horses while he would be plowing. You know, they used to plow with plows, you know, that, and 2 horses would pull it, you know.
They were still doing that when we were visiting.
That's
Yeah.
right, they were.
And I would just walk with him, and he would tell me all sorts of stories, and he would be nice to me. Sometimes I used to spend the whole day with him just doing all these kind of farm things, and no problem.
Well, let me ask you this question. If you communicated with your older relatives in the town, which was not that close, and you would say these, would you tell them the stories that were always being harassed?
There was nothing new because they were harassed there.
But when they were harassed, they had more people.
Yes, it was there. It was a different harassment. Here, we were harassed in Stav Novokoski because we were such a minute minority. You know, there they had problems also, although it was a different kind of problem. It was more organized anti-Semitism in that town than what we experienced in Stav Novokoski. Remember, in Stav Novokoski, we were considered the Jews that belonged to Stav Novokoski. We were performing certain basic things. Mimi Branche was sewing. All the people brought, whoever wanted to sew something. Yes, who do you call her? The Brancha. She would sew, and they wouldn't have to pay. They would pay in trade. They'd bring her chicken, they would bring her eggs, they would bring her butter. I mean, how do you think, I remember, that's another thing that my life consisted of, once a week, and that was fun for me. I was 5 at that point. Once a week, all the business was done in our house. Now, let me tell you, I didn't describe our house. I mean, our house, big deal. We had one tremendously big room. Probably that room consisted of your top over here, Arnie, right? And we had 2 beds. I slept with Rose in one bed, and my mom and dad slept in the other one. And then we had a kitchen and an oven and a little table where we would eat, right? And on the other, opposite it, we had a sofa towards the window of that room, and then a big commode like that would contain all the material. Any kind of material that you wanted, well, I shouldn't say any kind, but heck, a lot of different material would be in that commode. So once a week, I don't recall the day, the ladies would come from all the villages and buy things. Now, how did they buy it? It was a barter trade. They would bring things and take material. So they would come in, and my job was, I had like one box, one kind of pail for butter, one box for eggs, and one box for chicken and geese. So my mother used to tell me, all right, when the ladies come, you count up how many eggs they bring, how many chickens, you take a chicken and you hold it, and tell me how heavy it is. And same thing for the geese. Put the geese in one box and this and that. And I stood there, and they would come, and I would say hello, and they would say, Shlomo, Shlomo, ty będziesz gospodarzem. You know, you will be a businessman. Because here I am, a little kid doing all this. You know, so, okay, how many? And I used to count. I mean, they didn't bring 30 eggs, take my word for it. They brought maybe 8, 9, 10 eggs, because otherwise I couldn't count God knows how many there. You know, I could handle it, so obviously they didn't bring that many. And I would carry out, I'd tell Mom, this lady brought so many eggs, so much butter, a chicken, and Mom would write down, and that's it. And then I would ask her, do you want to buy some material? She'd say, yeah. I would go over to the commode, open the door, and I say, show me which one you want. And she'd say that. I'd take that. I took the meter stick, and I measured how many of these you want. She'd say 1 or 2. I took 1 or 2. That's all. I caught it.
That was the beginning of your future.
Yeah, I caught it, and I told my mother, this is the material the lady took. My mother would write down, I'm ready for the next person. So that was fun day for me, because I was really busy, and I didn't have to play with bottles and stuff like that. And so that was the most interesting part. I remember, so that was such fun day when we had that, you know. And not only this, the food that Mom used to make that day was good too, because she wouldn't go any place, and she'd make us eggs in the morning, and the lunch was good, and dinner was good, and, you know, because she would cook, right? And otherwise she was busy, because the next day, when she would take all that stuff with a wagon and a horse and a man, and she would go to Zamość or Izbice and sell it all to get the money, and then bring back more merchandise. That's the way it worked.
Buying and selling.
Right.